What if the maid you mocked for years walked back into your life as your millionaire boss? This Ghanaian drama will shock you to your core. Hit subscribe, drop your thoughts in the comments, and like this video if you're ready for the scandal to unfold. The Mensah mansion in East Legon rose above its surroundings like a private palace. High whitewashed walls kept the outside world at bay, while a wrought iron gate opened onto a driveway paved with imported Italian stone. The air inside the compound always carried the mingled scents of freshly cut grass, blooming hibiscus, and the faint tang of chlorine from the glistening swimming pool. A gardener clipped hedges in perfect lines, and 2 German shepherds patrolled lazily under the late afternoon sun. Inside the mansion, opulence spoke in every detail. The living room ceiling soared high enough to hold a crystal chandelier the size of a small car. Hand-woven Persian rugs lay on cold marble floors polished until they mirrored every movement. The walls were adorned with bold Ghanaian modernist paintings alongside gilded European frames, each piece worth more than the average annual salary. A grand piano, rarely played but always dusted, stood near the bay windows overlooking the garden. Here, 22-year-old Mensah floated through her days untouched by hardship. She was the only daughter of Nana Kwame Mensah, one of Ghana's most successful real estate developers, and his glamorous second wife, Adwoa. Yes, world was built from the finest things: clothes from Paris, handbags from Milan, holidays in Dubai. Her voice carried the easy authority of someone used to being obeyed. Servants greeted her with lowered eyes, and she had never once thought about what it cost for her family to live this way, in money, effort, or sacrifice. Among the household staff was a woman who seemed to exist in the periphery, as though she had been placed in the house but never truly belonged to it. Adwoa. She was in her late 40s, with cocoa-brown skin marked by years of sun, hard work, and unspoken grief. A faint limp shadowed her right step, and on her wrist ran a thin, deep scar, the kind that hinted at pain more than injury. She spoke sparingly, her voice soft but edged with something unplaceable, perhaps a memory. No one in the household knew much about her history. It was said she had been brought in 5 years ago, recommended by a church acquaintance of Nana Kwame. She had no family that visited, no stories she volunteered, no possessions beyond the basics. Her presence was like furniture in the eyes of the family, necessary for comfort, yet unworthy of thought. Adwoa, always dressed in silk or lace and smelling faintly of expensive perfume, saw Adwoa as little more than a burden to be tolerated. She found fault in everything: a glass not polished to perfection, the wrong arrangement of cutlery, the faintest trace of dust in a guest room. Accusations of petty theft came regularly, though never backed by proof. Adwoa's contempt was deliberate, a slow erosion of Adwoa's dignity, and she made sure the rest of the staff understood that the maid's place was firmly at the bottom. Absorbed her mother's disdain like it was her own birthright. She wielded her privilege like a whip. Adwoa became her target for small cruelties, scrubbing bathroom tiles with a toothbrush until her knees ached, carrying stacks of heavy chairs across the terrace only to be told to move them back, polishing the soles of shoes no one would see. Would mimic Adwoa's village accent for the amusement of friends who visited, her laughter loud while Adwoa's silence hung heavy in the air. If the limp slowed her pace, would sigh with exaggerated impatience, making a show of glancing at her watch. In public, Adwoa's eyes stayed lowered. She moved quietly from room to room, blending into the stillness of the house. But when night came, the facade shifted. Her quarters were small, tucked away at the far edge of the compound near the utility shed. The room was barely wide enough for a narrow bed, a small wooden wardrobe, and a cracked dressing table with a single flickering bulb overhead. Against the wall, beneath a folded strip of worn Kent cloth, she kept her most precious possession, a faded photograph. It showed a baby girl, barely a year old, dressed in a tiny white lace dress, her face bright with a smile so pure it seemed to light the paper. The edges of the photograph were frayed from years of being handled. On quiet nights, when the hum of the air conditioners in the main house drowned out the city beyond the walls, Adwoa would sit on the bed and hold the photograph in both hands. Her eyes would trace every feature of the child's face, the round cheeks, the faint curl of hair on the forehead, as if memorizing them all over again. Her breath would catch, her lips tremble, and slowly, tears would escape down her cheeks, rolling unchecked until they soaked the collar of her faded nightdress. When she finally lay down to sleep, the photograph would rest beside her pillow, the last thing her eyes saw before darkness claimed her. In the morning, she would tuck it back under the Kent cloth, put on her uniform, and step back into the role the Mensah household believed she was born to play. But the truth sat quietly in her chest like a locked box, waiting for the day it would shatter the world around her. The heavy rains came without warning that night, sweeping across East Legon in a sudden curtain of water. The wind pressed against the tall walls of the Mensah mansion, rattling the palm fronds and sending streams of rainwater into the gutters. Inside, the house glowed warmly, insulated from the storm. The marble floors glistened under the soft lights, and the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and Serwa's perfume drifting down from the master suite. Adwoa moved quietly through the kitchen, her limp more pronounced from the damp chill seeping into her bones. She had finished cleaning for the night, but a restless energy kept her from going to her quarters. She opened a drawer, her eyes scanning for something only she knew she needed. The faint clink of metal broke the stillness as her hand emerged holding a delicate gold necklace, one of Serwa's, recognizable from the ornate butterfly pendant studded with tiny gemstones. It was not in Adwoa's habit to linger over such things, but her gaze fixed on the necklace for a moment too long, her thumb tracing its curves as if it stirred a memory buried deep. She slipped it into her palm just as footsteps echoed down the hallway. A sharp shadow fell across the kitchen tiles. Minutes later, the quiet of the house shattered. There was movement in the corridors, the heavy rustle of expensive fabrics, the creak of doors opening and slamming. The staff whispered in the background, their voices low, sensing a disturbance they dared not name. Nana Kwame's tall frame appeared briefly in the kitchen doorway, his face unreadable, his eyes lingering on Adwoa before he stepped away. The matter, whatever it was, seemed to dissolve in the moment, yet the tension in the air did not leave. Later that night, as the rain softened to a steady drizzle, a muted argument took place in the garden. The voices were hushed, carried away by the wind, but fragments slipped into the open. Adwoa stood close to the hedges, her posture stiff, her face turned toward the man before her. Her lips moved with words weighted by years of silence, her eyes wet with something more than rain. Yeah, passing by an upstairs window, glanced down and caught a glimpse of the scene, the strange intimacy of their closeness, the way her father's shoulders sagged, the way Adwoa's hand trembled at her side. A single sentence drifted upward through the damp night air, cutting through the murmur of the storm. I never told her I am her mother. The words reached Ye like a ghost brushing against her skin, chilling her without reason. She stood frozen for a heartbeat before shaking her head, convincing herself she must have misheard. She walked away, but the phrase clung stubbornly to the edges of her thoughts. The following day, just as the sun began to sink into the horizon and the air grew heavy with the scent of impending rain again, a sleek black SUV rolled through the gates. The driver, a man in a crisp grey agbada, stepped out without hurry, his shoes gleaming against the wet pavement. He carried an envelope thick with papers and a small black USB stick tucked inside. Adwoa met him at the side entrance of the house. There were no greetings, no smiles, only the swift exchange of the envelope and a look that spoke of unfinished business. Within minutes, the SUV glided away, its tinted windows swallowing any trace of the visitor. That night, long after the main lights of the house went out, the faint creak of a door broke the silence. In the darkness, Nana Kwame slipped into the narrow hallway leading to the servants' quarters. His tall figure paused at Adwoa's door. The handle turned, the hinges groaned, and he stepped inside. He searched in silence, his hands moving methodically through drawers, under folded clothes, along the narrow shelf by the bed. But the envelope was gone. Somewhere in the shadows of the house, it had found a different place to hide. And in that unseen place, the first cracks in the careful facade of the Mensah family had begun to spread. The Kempinski Hotel ballroom glittered under 1,000 golden lights. Crystal chandeliers bathed the crowd in a warm glow, bouncing off champagne flutes and the sequined gowns of Ghana's elite. The air carried the faint scent of French perfume mixed with the sweetness of imported roses arranged in towering vases. Soft high-life music from a live band floated over the clink of glasses and polite laughter, while waiters in black waistcoats wove through the crowd with trays of canapés. Nana Kwame Mensah moved through the room like a man in his element, greeting investors and politicians with a practiced smile. Serwa stood at his side in a floor-length emerald gown, her diamond earrings flashing under the lights, her posture radiating ownership of the moment. Ye floated nearby with friends, her hair swept into an elegant updo, her gold heels clicking softly on the polished floor. But beneath the glamour, the room was alive with whispers, fragments of sentences exchanged behind raised glasses, glances cast toward the Mensah family and quickly withdrawn. Some faces carried a flicker of amusement, others a sharp curiosity, like predators scenting blood in the air. At the far end of the hall, near the dessert table, Mabel Oteng, a well-known socialite with a taste for trouble, leaned in close to a small circle of women. Their eyes followed Serwa as Mabel's words spread like kerosene on dry wood. The gossip moved quickly, passing from group to group until the ripple reached even the farthest corners of the ballroom. The story was irresistible. The Mensah maid, Adwoa, supposedly holding more money in her personal accounts than Serwa herself. The image of the quiet, limping woman in a starched uniform suddenly became something else entirely in the minds of the guests, a woman with secrets, leverage, and perhaps dangerous power. Serwa caught the change in atmosphere. The polite smiles aimed at her began to look like something else, restrained smirks, calculating eyes. Her champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. The evening, once a parade of status and influence, now felt like a stage where she had become the unknowing subject of the performance. When the family returned home, the tension clung to the air like humidity before a storm. The servants moved more quickly than usual, sensing the shift. Serwa's steps were sharp, her heels striking the marble like small hammers. Ye, flushed with embarrassment, sought out Adwoa in the kitchen. Her expression was tight, her body stiff with the kind of rage that comes from humiliation. In front of the other staff, Ye's hand rose and fell in a sharp slap across Adwoa's cheek. The sound cracked through the room like a whip. Adwoa's head turned with the force, her body swaying slightly before she steadied herself. For the first time in the years she had worked in the house, she did not lower her gaze. Her posture straightened, her chin lifted, and in her eyes was something entirely new, not defiance, not fear, but a quiet assertion of a truth long hidden. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, her limp carrying her through the service door and into the night. By morning, her absence was noted, but before questions could be asked, the day brought a fresh blow. Copies of the Daily Graphic arrived, the front page dominated by a photograph of Adwoa not in her maid's uniform, but in a sharp-tailored dress, standing beside the late mining tycoon Kwaku Boateng. The headline sprawled across the page in bold letters. Adwoa Boateng resurfaces, widow of mining magnate, heiress to multi-million-dollar fortune. The article told the story of her disappearance years ago after a bitter inheritance battle that had ended with her stepping out of public life. It spoke of offshore accounts, vast properties, and corporate shares in gold mining operations. The photograph showed a younger Adwoa, radiant and confident, with none of the quiet submission the Mensahs had known. The staff exchanged wide-eyed glances over the breakfast table. Outside the gates, journalists gathered with cameras and questions, their voices carrying faintly into the house. Inside, the Mensah family sat in stunned silence as the image of the maid they had belittled unraveled into something entirely different and infinitely more dangerous. The Mensah mansion no longer felt like the fortress it once was. Outside the high walls, camera flashes sparked through the bars of the front gate, reporters calling out questions that echoed faintly into the courtyard. The hum of their voices became a constant presence, like the distant buzzing of insects. Delivery drivers who once came and went without notice now lingered, craning their necks for a glimpse of the woman at the center of the city's latest scandal. Inside, the atmosphere was heavier than the air before a tropical storm. Serwa moved through the rooms with her jaw set, her once effortless grace replaced with short, sharp movements. Ye kept mostly to her bedroom, curtains drawn, her phone silenced after a flood of messages from friends, some curious, some mocking, some pretending concern. Nana Kwame disappeared for hours at a time, returning with the scent of sweat and dust clinging to his suit, his face drawn tight. Late one afternoon, the gates opened to admit a black Lexus SUV. From it stepped a tall man in a dark suit carrying a slim leather briefcase. His polished shoes clicked on the marble tiles as he entered the main hall, his presence immediately commanding attention. The staff melted away to the corners, eyes lowered, as he asked to see the family. In the dining room, he laid out a neat stack of documents on the polished mahogany table. Alongside them, a manila envelope bore the official seal of a law firm. From the briefcase came a second package, a printed DNA test report, its heading crisp and clinical. The report's conclusion was impossible to misinterpret. It declared, in unambiguous terms, that Yer Mensah was the biological daughter of Adwoa Boateng. The story unfolded in the lawyer's measured tone, each detail like another blow against the carefully constructed narrative of the Mensah family. Years ago, while Adwoa was hospitalized after the death of her husband, she had been coerced into signing papers she did not fully understand. Those papers had terminated her parental rights. Her infant daughter had been placed for adoption under the guardianship of Nana Kwame Mensah, who presented himself as a benefactor. The scar on Adwoa's wrist, long a silent question, had its answer in that period of her life, an attempt to end her suffering when she believed she had lost everything. But she survived, and over the years, she traced the threads of her daughter's life until they led her to the very house where she now worked. Nana Kwame had allowed her to stay, but under strict conditions. She would be close enough to see her child grow, yet forbidden to reveal the truth. In the silence that followed, the weight of the revelation pressed down on the room. Yes, memories began to reorder themselves without her permission, the years of sneers, the casual cruelty, the mocking of the village accent. Each recollection twisted into something sharper, cutting deeper now that she knew the woman she had treated with disdain was her own mother. Serwa's composure fractured. Her world, meticulously curated to keep her at the center, was suddenly smaller, overshadowed by a woman she had called a servant. Nana Kwame's authority, once unshakable, now felt hollow, his secrets exposed like the roots of an old tree after a storm. The staff moved through the house more cautiously than ever, avoiding eye contact with their employers. They, too, had read the papers, had whispered among themselves in the kitchen when the door was closed. The respect they once feigned for the family now shifted subtly toward the absent Adwoa. Night fell over the mansion, but the shadows inside were heavier than the darkness outside. For the first time, it was not the storm beyond the walls that threatened the household, it was the truth now sitting among them, unmovable and irreversible. The morning she returned, the sky over Accra was washed in pale gold. The gates of the Mensah mansion swung open, and a sleek black Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon rolled into the driveway. Its polished body reflected the manicured hedges and the white facade of the house. The driver stepped out first to open the rear door, and from it emerged Adwoa. She was no longer the woman in a faded uniform, shuffling quietly with a limp. Today, she stood tall in a tailored Kent dress threaded with gold, her wrists adorned with heavy bracelets, her hair swept up into an elegant bun that revealed diamond studs at her ears. A subtle, commanding fragrance lingered around her, the kind carried only by those accustomed to moving through boardrooms and private clubs. Every step she took seemed to echo against the marble of the entrance, not from her limp but from the certainty of someone who owned the ground beneath her feet. Inside the house, the staff froze mid-task. Their eyes followed her silently as she walked past, their expressions a mixture of awe and quiet satisfaction. They knew, in that moment, the balance of power in the household had shifted forever. Adwoa moved directly to the main hall, where Nana Kwame, Serwa, and Yer were gathered. The air was tense, thick with the scent of strong coffee and the faint bitterness of last night's arguments. From her leather handbag, Adwoa withdrew a crisp legal document. It was an offer, though in truth, it read more like a declaration. She had acquired controlling shares in one of Nana Kwame's companies, a struggling development firm that now depended entirely on her financial rescue. She was, by every legal and practical measure, his new boss. Serwa's face drained of color. Her diamond necklace caught the light, but her eyes were fixed on the papers with the stillness of someone watching her entire future shift beyond her control. Yer stood at her mother's side, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes flickering between fear, shame, and something else, the hesitant recognition of a bond she had spent years denying. The conditions were clear. There would be a public statement, not just an acknowledgement, but an apology, to be issued jointly by Serwa and Yer. The accusations, the humiliation, the years of degradation would be retracted in front of the same public that had consumed the scandal with such hunger. If they refused, Adwoa was prepared to pursue defamation and assault charges, supported by a legal team that now answered only to her. The silence stretched long in the hall, heavy enough to be felt in the walls themselves. Outside, the muffled hum of journalists could be heard beyond the gate, their presence a constant reminder that the world was watching. When the apology came, it was formal, controlled, and broadcast through every media channel that had once spread the whispers of the scandal. The cameras captured Ye standing beside her mother, her voice steady but her gaze lowered. The words were polished, but the weight behind them was real. Later, in the privacy of the house, Ye approached Adwoa. The two women stood facing each other in the grand hall, the polished marble between them reflecting the figures of mother and daughter. Ye's shoulders trembled as she lowered herself to her knees, bowing her head until her forehead nearly touched the floor. It was an image that would remain etched in the memories of the staff, the once untouchable daughter of the house, kneeling before the woman she had mocked and dismissed. Adwoa's hand reached down, resting lightly on Ye's head before lifting her up. Her eyes softened, though her voice unspoken carried the weight of a lifetime's lesson. Never judge a person by the dust on their shoes, for you do not know the road they have walked. By evening, Serwa was gone. Her departure was not dramatic, no shouting, no scene, just the quiet closing of a suitcase, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the bedroom she had once ruled. A taxi carried her away into the city's traffic, her face turned toward the window, her expression unreadable. In the days that followed, the mansion changed. Adwoa's presence filled it in a way it never had before, not as a servant, but as its rightful matriarch. Her laughter began to warm the once cold spaces, her footsteps deliberate and unhurried as she moved between rooms. Ye followed her often, listening, learning, carrying the fragile hope of building something new between them. One night, as the city lights of Accra twinkled in the distance, Adwoa and Ye stood together on the balcony. The breeze carried the faint sounds of traffic and music from a distant chop bar. Mother and daughter, silhouetted against the night, looked out over the city that had once conspired to keep them apart. Now, the world lay open before them, theirs to command, theirs to protect. And somewhere in the quiet below, the whispers that had once mocked the maid began to tell a different story, one of power reclaimed, of secrets overturned, and of a queen who had finally taken back her throne. And that brings us to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, don't forget to subscribe for more stories are yet to come.